Hey everyone, this is Turd Flinging Monkey, and today we're going to talk about Nietzsche, Star Wars, and MGTOW. And yes, all three of these things are related. So let's just jump into it. Let's jump into it. So something I notice about Nietzsche, whenever people are discussing him or making videos about him, a lot of people just dismiss him as promoting nihilism. They just call his philosophy nihilism. Like, oh, Nietzsche, he promoted nihilism, whatever. And then they just move on. No, Nietzsche did not promote nihilism. He was very concerned about nihilism. And he tried to prescribe a way to overcome nihilism. And no one listened. And now we are living in an age of nihilism. And everyone, Nietzsche told you about this and what to do about it. And everyone's just like, oh, Nietzsche was a nihilist. Like, no, he wasn't. Anyway. So I'm going to talk about a few things, but I'm also going to intersperse some clips from some videos which go into the concept I'm talking about in a lot more detail. So first thing we need to talk about is the two kinds of morality, slave morality and master morality. And I've done a couple videos about this in the past. If you understand master versus slave morality, you understand a lot of contemporary politics. You also understand why universal suffrage is a really stupid idea.
Most people do not question why things are considered morally good or evil. Rather, uncritically and largely unconsciously, they adopt the value judgments of good and evil dominant within their society. To answer this question, Nietzsche's categorization of individuals into two distinct types, the higher human beings and those who belong to the herd, must be examined. Higher humans have a unifying life project and are consumed by the drive to actualize their lofty goals. This unifying project is not undertaken for short-term gratification, but as a result of the higher man's vast historical perspective, is a form of work performed under the eye of centuries, a goal whose effects will remain long after the physical death of the higher man. For this type of lofty work, the higher man requires his solitude and freedom from the herd, the innumerable small and pitiable men, as Nietzsche wrote. The concept of greatness entails being noble, wanting to be by oneself, being able to be different, standing alone and having to live independently. In contrast to these higher humans, there exist the many, the herd. The herd is composed of two types, the last man and the slave. The last man is the quintessential mediocre man, striving solely for comfort and contentment, an end which makes him lazy and contemptible. The last man is wholly devoid of any creative urge within, and blind to higher values which render creativity possible. The slave, in contrast, is a weak and sickly human being, who suffers from himself and is filled with what Nietzsche called ressentiment, a festering hatred of life generated by feelings of impotence in the face of an external reality he feels to be overpowering and threatening. The slave attempts to bring down to a more mediocre level all those higher than him through the construction of a slave or herd morality. A herd morality inverts the natural values of life. The individual who is strong and independent, who attains feelings of power spontaneously through their creative endeavors and great health, is deemed by herd morality to be evil. On the other hand, all those who belong to the herd, the mediocre last men and the weak and impotent slaves, the vengeful disguised as judges, are deemed to be good.
So this is where the Star Wars thing comes in. I've decided to use Star Wars for two reasons. One is it's a very easy good versus evil thing, and it shows how the culture basically legitimizes slave morality as true morality and master morality as simply evil, as opposed to a different kind of morality, which is neither good nor evil. Now, are the Sith evil? Sure, in the context of the movie, because they're written that way. But if you go out into the expanded universe, like before Disney bought it and fucked it all to hell, the Sith were not objectively evil, they simply had a different moral system. This becomes very clear when you start to look at the history between the Jedi and the Sith, and the fact that the Jedi are the ones who struck first. And the Jedi do some really evil stuff themselves in the name of balance and equality and all that good stuff. Anyway, the point is, from a certain point of view, the Sith are the good guys and the Jedi are the bad guys. I'm not going to get into that. There's been videos about that sort of thing if you're more interested in the Star Wars thing. But I want to use the symbolism of the Jedi and the Sith to emphasize the difference between slave morality and master morality. Now, in Star Wars, George Lucas based the Jedi Order on Buddhism. He didn't really go into what philosophy drove the Sith. They were just evil bad guys. However, in the expanded universe, they actually did use master morality versus slave morality in the expanded universe. So this is why it's applicable. And it's stuck. Despite Disney buying the rights, Sith philosophy has remained more or less grounded in master morality. And the Jedi, their passive, succor the weak and all that stuff, that is slave morality. In fact, most religions teach slave morality. I actually can't think of a religion that doesn't teach slave morality. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. It's just interesting how a lot of what we talk about in contemporary politics are actually competing schools of slave morality. We've basically all agreed as a society that master morality is evil. So now we have different competing schools of slave morality, whether it's communism, Islam, Christianity. They're all teaching slave morality. It's just which one will win, which one will dominate the others and be the true slave morality. Another concept that Nietzsche talked about that is related to Star Wars is the concept of the Übermensch, or the Superman, and the last man.
The last man is the individual who specializes not in creation, but in consumption. In the midst of satiating base pleasures, he claims to have discovered happiness by virtue of the fact that he lives in the most technologically advanced and materially luxurious era in human history. But this self-infatuation of the last man conceals an underlying resentment and desire for revenge. On some level, the last man knows that despite his pleasures and comforts, he is empty and miserable. With no aspiration and no meaningful goals to pursue, he has nothing he can use to justify the pain and struggle needed to overcome himself and transform himself into something better. He is stagnant in his nest of comfort and miserable because of it. This misery does not render him inactive. On the contrary, it compels him to seek victims in the world. He cannot bear to see those who are flourishing and embodying higher values, and so he innocuously supports the complete de-individualization of every person in the name of equality. The last man's utopia is one in which total equality is maintained not from without by an oppressive ruling class, but from within, through the evil eye of envy and ridicule. No herdsman and one herd. Everyone wants the same thing. Everyone is the same. Whoever thinks otherwise goes voluntarily into the madhouse.
And this is perfectly encapsulated in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. So here we have two examples. We have Darth Nihilus on the left, and we have Kreia on the right. Now, Darth Nihilus, obviously his name is based on nihilism, which is obviously, perfect. But the last man, according to Nietzsche, was the embodiment of nihilism. When a society loses its morality because it, kills God, which has happened in the West, by the way, it embraces nihilism. This is what's so ironic about people dismissing Nietzsche as a nihilist, because he was actually warning what would happen and what has happened. And he was right, but everyone's just like, oh yeah, he was a nihilist. Don't listen to him. You should read. You should read some Marx. Yeah, he's got some good ideas in that Das Kapital. And Darth Nihilus imperfectly encapsulates it. If you're unfamiliar with the game, Darth Nihilus was a Sith Lord who basically hungered for life energy, and he would just kill everyone. And his ultimate goal wasn't to dominate the galaxy, it was to kill everything. Just destroy all life. Consume it all. He had no greater purpose. He just wanted to consume. That is the last man.
He, if he can truly be called a man any longer, is one of the dark lords that pursues you. He is one who has learned the greatest of the Sith teachings, and it enslaved him. He is a breach in the Force, capable of consuming the lives of those around him. One cannot have power of that magnitude and still think and perceive the universe as we do, as most of us do. And it devours him as he devours others. His mere presence kills all around him, slowly feeding him. He is already dead. It is simply a question of how many he kills before he falls. Do not think of his power as one would a weapon, or one of your warships of the Republic. It is terrible, but it is still a subtle thing. And that is why they and their techniques must be wiped out. No one again must experience and learn what her master did. Instead of sending one's will through connections in the Force, instead such connections are drawn upon, fed upon, and drained completely. Then you understand how terrible such a power is, and why it must be ended. It is an empty road to the dark side, and by traveling it, the price is death before one's time. It is not something he can direct or focus, much like hunger itself. He is more of a hole in the Force than a living thing. There is no strength in the hunger he possesses, and the will behind his power is a primal thing, and it rules him, not the other way around. It has its own will, its own instincts, and he cares nothing for the Sith, or its teachings, or the Jedi. And when the Jedi are dead, her master will feed on the galaxy, the Republic, and eventually consume the Sith as well. There is no future in the empty galaxy he sees, and that is why he must be stopped. The breach must be sealed before his power grows beyond what even we can hope to stop.
And you compare that to Kreia, and Kreia is a pretty good approximation of the Superman or Übermensch as Nietzsche called it. So what is an Übermensch? What is the Superman? A Superman or Übermensch is autonomous, free-thinking, strong-willed, independent, self-determined, self-actualized, and authentic. They have a creative mind and they wish to improve humanity. They're focused on becoming oneself and overcoming challenges for personal growth. They're not content but cheerful in the face of suffering. And they're continually overcoming themselves and transcending both imposed morality and nihilism equally. Now, what does this have to do with MGTOW? You know, I talk about people finding their new meaning and their new purpose, but it's not like a one and done. You find your meaning and purpose, and then the rest of your life is set, and you have like this life plan. You know, it's not how that works. You're constantly overcoming yourself. You're constantly trying to improve yourself. You're trying to find meaning. You're trying to find purpose. And what really kind of cemented this and inspired this video, I was watching this video on YouTube talking about the Superman. And there was a part at like the 2-minute mark where the guy talks about what a Superman would do or what the qualities of a Superman are. And just listen to it and think about MGTOW and see if a lot of this sounds strangely familiar.
He concluded that supermen are going to have some wonderful and sometimes unexpected characteristics. They will make their own values. They'll be very independently minded. They won't ask, what do other people admire, and follow along. They'll carve their own path. Supermen accept that they might need to hurt people in the name of great things. They can be selfish in strategic ways. Greatness for them will be about the reform of humanity towards pagan values, the values of Goethe. Supermen will never be resentful of the success of others. They'll accept suffering as a necessary component of good things. They'll understand that they're hard to understand, and that therefore they may often be lonely. They'll be gentle towards the weak, out of consciousness of their own great strength. They'll be a little bit wicked around sex, by conventional standards. They'll not be humble, but rather delight in their own abilities. They'll be interested in the practical application of culture to raise the mentality of society.
So I'm not saying that MGTOW philosophy is the Superman or anything like that. No. MGTOW is just an apolitical philosophy of living for yourself, self-improvement, self-actualization, avoiding the unnecessary entanglements of marriage and gynocentrism, and that's about it. But there's a so now what question after that. Once you kind of digest the red pill and once you walk away, once you go your own way, the question is now what? So my advice to anyone asking now what is to look at Nietzsche, look at Kreia in Knights of the Old Republic 2, transcend the imposed morality of others and overcome nihilism by overcoming yourself. And you will find happiness and meaning. In fact, even when bad times happen, you'll be cheerful. So I'm going to leave you with this clip from the philosophy of Kreia. I'll link all my videos in the description, by the way. But I thought this one part was particularly applicable.
When speaking to Hanhar, he explains to you the customs of the Wookiees regarding life debts. In a way, life debts are a form of slavery, but of the mind, that bind a person into servitude. In his madness, Hanhar killed his tribe to save them from becoming slave to others. It's the reason why he wears shackles around his wrists. If you ask him why he doesn't simply abandon his codes, He answers that he cannot. He would no longer be a part of his tribe. He would have to create his own codes, his own values, based on nothing, and that is something he cannot do. As the exile remarks, to face such oblivion, to stand firm in your own conviction and belief, free of ready-made codes, that is the lesson of strength. If you become a slave to codes or an ideology, then your entire being is dictated by categorical imperatives, abstract notions of your mind. It means to live by pure ideology, to the point where you no longer have selfish values or desires, as though you're no longer alive. Upon returning to Kreia, you tell her your discovery. Hanhar is strong, yet he is powerless. Raw strength is nothing compared to the will of the mind.
Ah, you are a perceptive one indeed. In this instance you are correct. All that strength, that anger, yet it is held in check, restrained by his beliefs, his doubt. Everyone is made up of events in their past, and it forms walls around one's spirit, or breaks such walls down. The mind makes some powerless, and gives strength to others. He walks, but he is dead. It is because he is not ready to give up his ties yet. It is much like Jedi who will not give up their code. It is to surrender yourself, to make yourself a slave to a teaching or belief that makes it so that belief will always rule you.
The lesson is about volition, the power to use your will, which is equally as important as obtaining power. Never live for the sake of another or an ideology. Live for yourself. And if you do believe in an ideology, then find its opposite, so that you may reinforce it by correcting its flaws. Become what strengthens an ideology, not a slave to it by following it dogmatically.
To believe in an ideal is to be willing to betray it. It is something no Sith or Jedi has ever truly learned. That is the lesson of strength.
After Kreia explains this lesson, she introduces a final test to the player directly to see if they've understood her philosophy.
Yet that is not the only lesson that the beast can teach us. Not only does one's will control one's strength, but one's will can control and draw upon the strength of others. Surely you have felt the beast's presence on board this ship, stalking, restless. It is a more primal connection you feel, and the hunger you feel does not stem from Hanhar. It is something you may draw upon, his very life if need be. He does not realize how deeply his life debt runs, but he will. When you suffer, call upon that hunger, and the beast shall be that upon which your will may draw strength. Reach out, feel his presence within the ship, clawing at you, pacing. Feel the rumbling of the hull, the metal around you like a cage, and the building anger, the blood that rises behind the eyes, a bloodlust that cannot be sated. If you accept it, you will find your strength increase and your vitality return to you faster with every breath.
Accepting this power will give a permanent +2 to your strength.
Good. You know it now. The predator-prey relationship, the strong feeding on the weak. It will serve you.
More power is always good, right? If you've understood anything about Kreia and her philosophy, then the answer should be obvious. But it is a choice that few people have ever made while playing this game. Most accept this gift, blindly, without understanding the true lesson of strength. Kreia will ask why you would reject such an offer.
Are you sure? It will grant you strength, vitality for the times ahead. Forsake it, deny it, and you will deny power.
The answer given foreshadows the decision made on Malachor 5 and why the exile is so important to the Star Wars canon.
Ah, and that is the choice of Malachor 5 at last. You have made a strange choice, a unique choice. Very well, I accept it. And know that that is the true lesson of strength, to turn away from strength that is not your own.